Good morning. How's everybody? I saw a sign yesterday somewhere, and I thought it told pretty much how high everything's getting. It said, for the price of 2 hamburgers, you can buy one and get the second one. So, yeah, okay. Anyway, Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Finish up. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, Paul, that's Wednesday night, isn't it? Solomon has been talking about vanity. He's been making really what you might say he's sort of been telling his story. He's been telling his story of what kind of he was going through, trying to search for and find happiness. He's going to make a change in chapter 5. He's going to go more from reflection to sort of, I guess you could say, admonishing, but the reader. But in Ecclesiastes 4, he ends it as the chapter's divisions. Of course, he didn't write the chapter divisions, but as we have them. And he is telling us how important it is to lean upon each other. We can't get through life alone. I mean, that's a reality. One of the sad things about depression and mental issues that are seemingly and thankfully coming to the forefront today is the fact that oftentimes folks that are going through that feel as if they can't reach out. And it's so tragic and it's so sad. Not everybody can help, and not everybody can help to the same level. That's a given. But at the same time, too, it's a reflection of the illness. It's really not a reflection of the individual. It's a reflection of the illness. But it causes them to turn inward. And matter of fact, I'll ask you just to say a little prayer for a young girl I know that's going through this. And Suzanne was telling me this morning she had found out yesterday that she's had 2 puppies. Evidently, they were siblings since 2009, and they had to put them down yesterday. So she would be borderline episode for the next few days. So please remember, just a little girl that Brother Paul knows, and the Lord will know who she is. And we want to pray for her. But while that's the sadness of the illness, Solomon reminds us really of how important it is, at least in where we're going to start, verse 9, that 2 are better than 1. And the reason being because he says that they have a good reward for their labor. When you think about Jesus in Matthew chapter 10 sending those out on what is called the limited commission, you notice that he sent them out by 2. You think about Paul, you think about his missionary journey. He at least went with 2. I think he may have had more, but there were at least 2. The reason being because if one falls, verse 10, if they fall, one lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no help to help him up. It's important that we find someone that we can depend on. And really, I think, and let me say this and take no offense to it, while my mate, my spouse, my wife is of utmost importance to me in my ministry, I could not do what I do without Suzanne. The good Lord put us together, and of course we grew up together. We same hometown and basically just grew up together. But I couldn't have asked for a better wife for me in many ways, and she balances me out. I've shared with you back some time ago when I asked my son why he wanted to marry the young girl that he married, my daughter-in-law, why he wanted to marry Kara. He said, because she completes me. And I thought, well, aren't you just smart? Must have got it from your mama. But anyway, the importance of somebody else other than your spouse, finding somebody else that you can confide in, somebody else that you can occasionally go out and eat breakfast with or supper with or grab a piece of pie somewhere with somebody or just spend a little time on the phone. The importance of finding somebody that you can talk to, that you can spend time with. And isolation is sometimes it's very helpful, but sometimes it's what we feel like we have to do, but it becomes really our own worst enemy. And so Solomon says two are better than one. And then he says, he sort of makes this statement again. He says in verse 11, again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? When I read this verse, I think of the homeless people. And sometimes we get upset when we think about it, but I want you to think about it in different ways. A lot of times you see our homeless people with a dog or a cat, mostly a dog. Sometimes you wonder why in the world those folks have a dog when they seemingly can't afford themselves. Well, you got to understand a couple of things. Most of them are sleeping out either by themselves or in groups, as of course we know in our neighborhood. But those dogs do a couple of things. They do more than that. They're good companions to these individuals, someone they can talk to without getting a response. But also they keep protecting them and their possessions. And then also in the winter months, it's someone to lie with to create a heat to keep them warm. And so, and if you've watched some folks, not everybody, but some of the homeless, sometimes if you give them food, they give their animal food before they eat any of it. So, but anytime I read this verse, I think of those folks and I think of those reasons. But Solomon is trying to make the point. Two are better than one. More people, better. And then he says in verse 12, though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Strength in numbers. Threefold cord. Now, you can look at a threefold cord in a lot of ways. Years ago, preached a sermon on the threefold cord with regards to parents and how that parents needed a support group, but parents also needed the church and parents needed God. There's your threefold cord. You think about a rope. A rope of one strand is easily broken. A rope of many strands, very difficult to break. And so there's the thought. Solomon is just trying to get us to see how important others are in our lives. And so the fact that we need others. Anything else in those verses that maybe we missed? Better a poor and wise youth than an old foolish king who would be admonished no more. Poor and wise youth. The Hebrew word there, poor, is interesting because it really means someone who lacks social status. Well, that could be any of us. Anybody that lacks social status. But he says a poor and wise youth is better than an old king who won't listen. Do we ever get it to our point in life where we won't listen? I hope not. I know more than you. I've run into people like that. I had a man one time tell me that he said, the young think they know everything, but those of us that are old do. And I thought, there's no wisdom in that. There's no wisdom in that. Because at times I learn as much from a young person as I do from a person of age. And age does not equate to wisdom all the time. Depends on how the old man, if you will, grows through his life. So, but Solomon reminds us here, he says, somebody won't listen. He says it's better to be young and wise and to be wise, but to be young and wise. For he comes out of prison to be king. He's talking about the king. Although he was born poor in his kingdom, he comes out of probably debtor's prison for maybe political or economic reasons. He's put in jail. He's put in prison. Excuse me. And he said, well, excuse me. I'm going to get it in a minute. There it comes. He said, I saw all the living who walk under the sun, verse 15. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. One king, if you will, succeeds another. And there's the cycle of life. Changes of thought, changes of action. As we grow older, what happens? We get to where we don't care as much, or we don't have the strength or the energy to put in it. And the young take over. It's not always bad. Solomon reminds us of that. And then he says, as he closes out this chapter, as we see it, he says, there's no end of all the people over whom he was made king, yet those who come afterward will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Once one's popular, they may not always be popular, right? I think in some ways, that's what Solomon is saying. Once a king doesn't mean you're always a king. Once you're on top of the world doesn't mean you're always on top of the world. Once everybody looks at you and glories in how wonderful you are doesn't mean they'll always do that. And so it reminds us really of the change of life and how as we grow older, there are certain things we have to accept. But one of the important things to remember as we grow older, I think, is to always add new wood. Now think about that. A tree, as long as it's growing, as long as it's healthy, is doing what? It's adding new wood every year. But once it begins to die, or once it's cut down and it's made into, say, a post and put into the ground, it begins to deteriorate, right? And so you have to kind of ask yourself, do I want to grow new wood today or this year? Or do I just want to sit and rot? And that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. And I think in some ways, at least for me, when I read these last 5 verses, that's one of the lessons I get out of it. Is let me add a little wood this year. Let me grow a little bit. Let me get a little bit better. Let me get a little stronger. Let me know a little bit more. For our lesson this morning in our sermon, we're going to study out of the book of Proverbs. And I'd always known this, but it struck me again this week as I was studying this, what Proverbs really is all about. The book of Proverbs, written by the same individual that wrote Ecclesiastes, I believe, is a collection of sayings. But if you look in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8, he says, my son, hear the instruction of the father, forsake not the law of your mother. Really, in reality, what Solomon is saying is, listen to what I'm about to tell you. And then, if you go over to the 5th chapter, verse 1, he says the same thing in different words, but he says, pay attention to what you're being told. Learn from what I've learned from. And so, Proverbs, being a book then that was written possibly to some of his children, if not all of his children, to remind them and to say, here's the wisdom of life. Well, in the book of Ecclesiastes, he's trying to show them how to get through life, how life has meaning. And so there's a great correlation between the two. Anything else? Right. 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 Yeah. Right. King. Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. I I think he sees that, knowing, as a person in leadership, you should know what's going on, and you may not always know everything, but he should have and known a lot. And so, yeah, I think there's a foreshadowing, if you will. He sees it. Yeah. Yeah, I see. Yes, because I see this. I really do. I see this book written towards the end of his life, where he sees what's coming, but he's also has seen what has passed. So yeah, yeah, I see it. I agree. Yeah, I thoroughly believe that. I guess I was raised that way too, but I thoroughly believe that. Anything else? All good. Well, we try to learn some lessons in these chapters as we go through them. Let me give you just two. If you look back through the chapter, and of course we did the biggest portion of it last week. But one of the things that we learned in the first part of the chapter was we need balance in our life. We need a life of balance, but we need balance in our life, and that's not always easy to keep. Not always easy to keep a balance in everything that we do, but it's important. I think I think I said this not long ago. If I didn't, I should have. But we are Christians that are to be balanced. Joshua chapter 1, don't turn to the right hand or the left. Because we serve a God that's balanced. God, Paul wrote in Romans chapter 11, behold the goodness and severity of God. He's not overly severe, but the goodness is, it's balanced. And he produced a Bible, if you will, that reproves and rebukes, but it also exhorts. And so it's balanced. And so we need to be balanced. And so we need to be a balanced and to live a balanced life. But then a second lesson that I look at this chapter, I find, and we've just talked about that, is the fact that we need one another. We need one another. Anything else? All right, well, let's mosey on into the fifth chapter then. You ever made a vow, a promise? You're going to do something? I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to take care of that. You ever made a vow with God? Well, there are some. Probably the easiest one that comes to mind is Hannah. Give me a child and I'll give him back to you. That type of deal. It's a deal usually that we make, and one author talked about a vow as I was reading this week, and I thought it was interesting. He said usually our vows with God are to get God indebted to us. And it's not so much about us getting indebted to God, but God getting indebted to us, God doing something for us. But if he does something for us, we'll do this. God, if you'll get me through this illness, I promise to go back to church. God, if you let me get through this sickness, I promise to be a better person, so forth and so on. Those type vows. You've probably made them, maybe not from a strict sense, but you just really thought, if I could do this, then if this will happen, then I'll do this. Well, vows are often made in the Bible. You think about Hannah, you think about David, you think about Ananias and Sapphira, you think about Absalom, you think about a whole host of other folks. You can make a vow. Leviticus 23 deals a little bit with the regulation of vows. I think beginning about the 23rd verse there in Leviticus 23. The thought is, or here's how you treat a vow. But the Bible doesn't tell us we have to make vows. We agree, of course, that our word becomes our bond. But this is a little bit different, if you will, thought. And we'll talk about it in just a second. We did, as we said a while ago, in chapters 1 through 4, Solomon seemingly reflected on life. Now, the whole book in many ways is his search for happiness. He sought worldly pleasures, he sought riches, he sought wisdom. He didn't find happiness in those things. Those are the things that we've already covered. He's going to turn a little bit now, instead of talking about from the standpoint of reflection, but talk more about admonition. Here's things you need to do. I think he's really started that kind of in the 4th chapter already, but he makes a little turn. And so he begins to talk about, be careful of vows, walk prudently, he says, when you go to the house of God, walk carefully and draw near to listen rather than to give sacrifice of fools, for they do not know they do not know that they do evil. Walk carefully. Here's some advice. I want you to be more. I want you to be a person that's right. And so he advises, his advice here is walk carefully when you go to the house of God. But he says, I want you to listen, draw near, listen. This is an admonition that, as we said, book of Proverbs, several times, and I gave you Proverbs 1:8 and 5:1, but there are several times through the book where Solomon invites the listener or the reader to listen to what I'm saying. And he says, draw near to listen rather than give sacrifices of fools. Don't try to impress God. Come to worship for the purpose of worshiping. For individuals that really are trying to impress God, he says they don't really know that they do evil. When we come to worship, when we come to the house of God, as he calls it, we come for the purpose of God, to glorify God. I personally think that as a society, and I'm not talking about anybody's children, I'm not talking about anybody's family members, I'm saying as a society whole, those that are in their 20s and 30s have lost focus. Maybe we didn't do a good job teaching them. There's several possibilities, but have lost their focus on really what worship is all about. That worship is not about them or us. Worship is about God. Worship is our opportunity to spend some time in growing our relationship with God. Worship is about us glorifying the one who's made everything. And worship is about us thanking him for what he has, is, and will do for us throughout our life and throughout the past week. That's what worship is about. Now, there's been stigmas with it, but and like I say, I'm speaking as a society now. I'm not speaking as, I'm thinking of your child, or I'm thinking of my child, or I'm thinking of others that I know. But as a society, worship has become, in the 20 and 30-year-old set, it has become an ugly word. Number one, because they want to be entertained. Number two, because they have associated it with the fact, well, it does nothing for me. Well, hopefully it does. That worship edifies as well. But worship is not about them. And so there are other things to talk about. But Solomon is basically, I see in verse 1 saying, look, when you worship, understand that your worship comes from the heart. And you don't just bring out sacrifices. You don't just bring out, oh, here's another animal here. Give it to the priest, let him sacrifice it. And, that's my worship to God. And so it reminds us from a New Testament application standpoint, to stretch this analogy a little bit further, it reminds us that when we come to worship, we come with a purpose. We leave with a joyful heart, We leave with hopefully I'm going to do better heart this week. We may not remember anything. We may not remember one particular scripture that the preacher says. We may not remember any of the songs that were led. We may not remember anything that was said by the individuals that led the prayer. We may not remember any of that. But it's that connection that we make, that we grow. And in that connection, we understand that we didn't just come and spend our time and give a little sacrifice to God, but we've come to worship and spend time with Him. Anything anybody wants to say or add to that? Well, it says, don't be rash with your mouth. Well, thank you. I wished I had learned that in my 20s. and let your heart utter anything hastily before God. Exercise restraint with your mouth. Hard to do, isn't it? Every time I think of that, I think of you don't see this sign a lot, but you did when I first started driving, and you still see it occasionally, but there's a sign that when I first started driving, slippery when wet. Of course, we do it now. We put it up for that little tripod or that little bifold that's put up in the bathrooms after they've, mopped the floors. Maybe slippery. Well, that's the old tongue. Slippery when wet. And it should always stay wet. But Solomon says, measure your words. For God is in heaven and you are on earth, therefore let your words be few. Now, he's talking more about vows. Vows tend to invoke God one way or the other. Whether it's a vow that you make to and with God, or it's a vow that you make with somebody else, but you invoke God. He says, basically, let God stay where he is. Therefore, he says, measure your words, let them be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. Dream represents what? What does a dream represent? Nobody really knows. It really, I forgot. I can't remember which book it was, but I wrote it down because I thought this was interesting. This individual said, dreams represent what does not last. Now, we're talking about these little things we see at night. My sweet wife, I didn't understand it this week, and I still really don't, but one night, evidently, she dreamed a dream that she remembered. Now, you dream every night. If you've ever studied sleep, you find out that you dream every night. You don't remember the dreams, and there's a lot of reasons you don't remember the dreams. Sometimes it's because of the way you wake up. Sometimes it's because of other issues. But you dream, and you dream all the time. And lo and behold, my sweet wife had this dream, and it so bumfugled her, I guess, that she wrote it down. And she read it to me one night, I guess, at supper. She said, I just got to tell you about it. It made no sense. And she knew it made no sense. But she said, I just want to tell you about it. I said, okay. So we talked a little bit about it. Dreams, what do they mean? Now, we can dream, and we use that word from the standpoint of think about the future, right? I dream for a better world. I dream for whatever my goal or ambition is. But this is more of the dream, if you will, from the standpoint of what we think of at night. He says, but a dream comes through much activity. Fool's voice is known by many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it. Your word's your bond. Don't mislead. For he has no pleasure in fools. Talking about God. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. So we have a responsibility. It gets down to, when you sort of boil all that down, it gets down to the point of, if you say it, do it. Keep your word. If you tell somebody you're going to do something, if you promise them something, do it. Do it. That's why I guess I have so much trouble with folks that promise you things, whether it be a repairman or installation people or a company or whatever it may be, an individual or a company, and then don't follow through with it. When I was at Pomona, we had right in front of our church building. If you haven't been by it, hopefully I can explain it where you would understand it. Right in front of the church building, there's a patch of grass. And then right beyond the patch of grass is really where the parking lot starts. And the parking lot basically went all the way around the building. Well, in the corners of the small patches of grass were lights, safety security lights, and poles. And one day I came in, going to the office, and I pulled in the front drive, and I noticed one of the poles was leaning on the ground. And I thought, well, okay, it rained a lot last night. Maybe it just fell over. Well, before long, I got a call. Secretary wasn't there. I took the call, and the man said, I go to, and he went to the church right down the street. He said, my wife parks in your parking lot every day and catches a ride. And I said, well, there's several cars. He said, well, it was raining last night. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, when she left, she hit that pole and she knocked it down. We're willing to pay whatever it takes to get it replaced. Well, come to find out, the pole was metal. I knew that, but it had rusted. And so it didn't take much to knock it over. And I don't know. I don't remember the details with regards if the man paid or if the church just paid for it or what. They were very, very nice people. But I do remember this, that the company, the electrician that came, looked at the other pole and said, we think you need to fix that one. It's rusting too. And so it was agreed. At that time, we were in a mess anyway. We didn't have elders. The men agreed, let's go on and get it fixed. And so we made an agreement with the company that had fixed the first one, come fix the second one. Now, could be a long story, but let me just tell you, for a year, I pursued this company. At least seemingly every other week, I would call and talk to the secretary or leave a message. Hey, you promised you were going to come. Won't you come? Well, to make a long story short, come to find out, within that year, the man had left his wife, divorced his wife, and was marrying the secretary. So anyway, I went into, and I said to the office one day, to their office, and I said, look, you promised us that you'd fix it. We want you to fix it. We feel like we've made an agreement with you to fix this. Okay. Well, I'm busy this week, but I'll put you on the schedule for next week. Which I knew meant what? He wasn't coming. He hadn't been there in a year. He wasn't coming. And I had already, so to speak, caught him with his hand in the cookie jar with regards to his secretary, because his secretary came out and said she had never received any messages. I said, well, how about voicemails? I've left those too. Oh. So anyway, to make a long story short, when I walked out, I knew he didn't add me to the schedule because he didn't write it down. So sure enough, he didn't come. Now, I don't know if they've gotten it fixed since or not. I'm out of it. But there he was for a year. I was being promised, we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. Never fixed it. That's really what Solomon is saying. Now, admittedly, you might say, well, these are more vows to God. Yeah, but he's also in that, not only just talking about vows to God, but he's talking about, promises you make to people. Let your word be your bond. If you say it, do it. So the admonition in some ways is be careful what you say. Anything else. So don't let your mouth cause your flesh to sin. I like this. This is so simple. It says, don't let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuses and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words, there's also vanity. Now comes the conclusion, and this is what's important. But fear God. Respect God, honor God, Do what God says. So, and if you fear God, what are you going to do? Your word's pretty much going to be your bond, right? If you see, verse 8, he changes thought here. He changes more. He talks about prosperity, gain, and honoring people. And he talks a lot about money and wealth in this next section. He says, if you see the oppression of the poor and the violent, perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, do not marvel at the matter, for high officials watch over high officials, and higher officials are over them. You ever watched that in politics? You ever watched it in politics within a business? You know, people over people over people over people, and every one of them's covering for the other. No one will come out and say, yep, we messed up, or they did wrong. They're going to pay for it. We're going to straighten it out. But one covers for another, which covers for another, which covers for another in the hierarchy of all things. So he says, verse 9, moreover, the profit of the land is for all, even the king is served from the field. Well, that's true. And he says, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. He'll always want more. Nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. This verse has more of a general application for me, maybe not for you, but for me, than just wealth. People that you love, when they pass away, don't you want just one more conversation with them? A little more time with them? When things happen, and relationships get destroyed for whatever reasons, you want just a little bit more. He is talking about money here. He is talking about wealth. And he says, okay, whatever he has, whoever, it doesn't matter. We always want more. You know, you've heard people say, you know, if I were to win $1 million in the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes, I'd be happy. No, you wouldn't. Because you'd want to win it again next year. We're very rarely happy with what we have. Now, we might be satisfied, and we've got to learn. You know, we talked about Philippians 4:13 recently. Paul said, I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. And that word learned there, as we talked about when we talked about it, means to learn from a standpoint of the process of time. It's not just he woke up and he was happy with what he had. So through life and the circumstances of life and what he went through, he learned to be happy. And that's really what we need to we need to say, okay, this is my lot in life. This is where I am. And I'm all right with that. I could use a little more, but I'm all right with what I have, and I'll learn to live with what I have. Well, Solomon says here, he says, man that loves money, he's going to want more. When goods increase, verse 11, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? Whatever you have, you're going to want more. Money, does it solve problems? Not really. What profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes, to look at what they have? In other words, the fellow that has a lot, he wants more. And he wants more only just so he can look at it. Now, if he's going to use it, or she, we're using he from a generic sense, if he's going to use it to help others, that's a whole different story. And there's a lot of folks that whatever they have, they use it to help others, and that is tremendous. One of the things that kind of died down with the pandemic, but you had seen a rise for about the 10 previous years, is a lot of companies that had gone into business for themselves also were making social statements. In other words, 1% of our sales goes to whatever nonprofit organization they could do. Now, maybe they're still out there. I haven't seen as many come up in the last 3 or 4 years as we did before that. And those were good things. I didn't always agree with the social statements they were trying to make. But Solomon says here, he says, does wealth really solve problems? The individual that has some wants more. But what's he going to do? Well, he's just going to look at it. Well, hopefully he doesn't. Hopefully he does something with it. And then he talks about wealth bringing peace of mind. He said the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, pleasant. The word sweet means pleasant. whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. Can't sleep. Why? Because he's trying to figure out how to do what? Make more, right? There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there's nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as a king, and he shall take nothing from his labor which he may carry away in his hand. Verse 15, often used in funerals, often used in sermons to remind us that what we are gathering here upon this earth is to be used by someone. And so he says here, he says, the riches of the perish. Look at verse 14. The riches but those riches perish through misfortune. Through the word misfortune, you might have a footnote in your Bible. This that I've run off has a footnote. Misfortune. Bad business. Bad business. You lose what you have through bad business. Now, right now you're losing everything that you have. Why? Because the stock market keeps going down. I keep asking Jim to bring it back up. He's trying hard. That's not all your fault. But he says here, he talks about, he says, when he begats a son, there's nothing in his hand. Through bad business, he seemingly has nothing. As he came forth of his mother's womb, I want to really look at this verse for just a second. Naked shall he return to go as he came. Isn't that true? We basically come with empty hands. Usually, though, when we come out of the birth canal, our hands are clenched. Well, we leave life with the same. Now, you could be, I think I told this story here. Well, it might have been last year when we went to the mountains. Suzanne and I think it was last year. It was a trip to the mountains, and if you go to the mountains, if you're the Darties, you have to go to Cades Cove. And the reason we go to Cades Cove is because we like to sit in traffic. but you love the beauty of that area. And yeah, look at cars. And almost, at the back end of it is the grist mill and a couple of the barns and a little shop. And this had to be last year because COVID restrictions were in, and they were only allowing 3 or 4 people in the little shop, and you had to line up. And my sweet wife had found something, and she wanted to buy it, and so she was standing in line. I had gone to the grist mill, and also I had heard that there had just been a bear sighting a little ways away, and I saw a ranger down there, and I wanted to go talk to him for a minute. And so I went that way, and I came back, and my wonderful wife's in line. She was going to buy something. Now, you grandmamas can appreciate this. You know what she said? I'm buying it for Graceland. Famous words. Buys them every time. Wins every time. I said, she doesn't need that. Well, I'm getting it for her. It doesn't cost that much. And I quoted the price. And she said, well, that's not much. I said, yeah, but I want to have a little money when I die. She didn't take to that, but the lady behind her said, I like that. I'm going to use that. I thought, well, you're in line to buy something. It's not meaning anything to you either. But anyway, wealth and prosperity. We come in this world with nothing. We're going to leave with nothing. Now, admittedly, we want enough to cover our expenses. And yes, it would be nice to leave our children with a little bit of money or a little bit of goods. But Solomon's point is that wealth is not buying you the happiness that you think it is. It's not getting you what you think is the outcome. I'm reminded of the story, and I don't think it was Rockefeller, but it was somebody along that caliber, had seen a painting that they wanted to buy in an auction book, or had seen it in a book, and they wanted to buy the painting. And so they hired an individual to go find where the painting was so that they could buy the painting. Money was no object. And after doing all this research, the individual came back and said, I found the painting. And the individual said, wonderful, where is it? We're going to go buy it. And they said, it's in one of your warehouses. Oh, okay. So we just have to remember that. And Steve, do you mind? Somebody I think's at the back door. Thank you very much. And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All of his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. This is evil. He says, just exactly as he came, that's how he's going to go. What profit? If by, I just want to stop right there because I want to talk about content next week. So we'll start in verse 18. But I want to say this. What we leave, not just our children, but those that are of our families and those that will just come behind us, society that will just come behind us. This is a question I think we need to ask. There's a great question. I thought the other day, I thought, I need to preach a sermon on this in Nehemiah. And it says basically, how shall I be remembered? Well, I see two things in that. How am I going to be remembered? And I can only affect the way people remember me by the way I act and what I do and how I handle myself and I handle my business. But what's my legacy? What am I going to leave? As Karen says, what am I going to leave the person behind me? And how am I going to leave it for them? And that's something to consider. And I think in part, at least, that's something to consider with regards to these last couple of verses. Anything else? Well, let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day. We're thankful for the blessing of it. We're thankful for the opportunity to study your word and to be together in a study of your word. We ask now that you bless this study, that you bless us and keep us. Be with those that are sick, be with those that are not feeling well. We ask that you watch over them, keep them. Be with those that are hurting. We know that we have some our congregation that are somewhat attached to our congregation that are hurting, and we ask that you bless them and keep them. Be with us in our period of worship. Help us to worship you both in spirit and in truth. Watch over us, bless us, and hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Have a great week. Thank y'all.